Hi everybody, it's Mr. Stevens here. We are back with Son of the Morning Star, Custer and the Little Bighorn by Evan S. Connell, and we are going to pick right back up where we left off in the last video. I hope you guys are still enjoying it. I know that I am, and away we go. Benteen collected a few volunteers, planted himself in front, and braced them with a speech that might have sounded natural in 1876, but today sounds ludicrous. Quote, "All ready now, men. Now's your time. Give 'em hell. Hip, hip, here we go." Off they went with a loud hurrah. Quote, "Every man but one who lay in his pit crying like a child." Hip, hip, hurrah. Every man Jack, except that coward. It is straight from the pages of a Victorian adventure book. This weeping trooper was not alone. Others behaved badly. Some acquired nicknames they would never lose. Cracker Box Dan spent 2 days behind a cracker box. Apreo Mickey, possibly a reference to Captain Miles Moylan, hid behind a pack saddle. And according to John Burkham, young Billy Blake pretended to be hurt so he would not have to fight. They were good soldiers, Berkman adds, but the panic in the valley had emptied their heads. Private Peter Thompson saw a man from A Company lying motionless, face down, apparently dead. 2 soldiers dragged a piece of canvas with which they meant to build a shelter for the wounded, told him to get out of the way. He did not move. One of them kicked him and he struggled to his feet, insisting that he was sick. Quote, "A more miserable-looking wretch it would be difficult to find," says Thompson. "The man was almost frightened to death. He walked a few steps and fell to the ground, heedless to the heat of the sun or anything else going on around him." Lieutenant Edgerly wrote to his wife that a D Company trooper, Private Patrick Golden, did everything he was supposed to on that first day, but that night, after the firing stopped, he asked a sergeant if the Indians would return. The sergeant guessed they would return in the morning. Golden then began to cry, and he said, quote, "Tom, if they come back, they will kill me." There are 2 other accounts of Golden's behavior, very different, but Edgerly's is considered the most reliable. Next morning, he said, when he and Private Steins came to a large rifle pit with Golden alone in the middle of it, Steins asked, quote, "Paddy, whose hole is this?" Golden didn't know, and because everybody else was hiding in a pit, Edgerly and Steins threw themselves down next to him, one on either side. Moments later, a bullet streaked through the crest of the pit, showering them with dirt, and struck Golden. He groaned once, Edgerly wrote, quote, "pushed with his right foot, and was dead." Other men fought bravely at first, like Golden, but after a while grew timid. Others, for reasons unknown only to themselves, behaved just the opposite. Benteen's berserk charge turned out to be a spectacular success. The closest warriors fled from these savage bluecoats, not one of whom was injured. But then, just as they got back to the pits, a bullet hit the weeping coward, between the eyes. Presumably he was hit by an Indian bullet, although some enraged member of Benteen's squad may have murdered him. The captain's view of this absurd charge, which he called, quote, "the Chinese act," is neither idealistic nor heroic. He was a pragmatic man. He understood the psychological effects of noise, so he instructed his volunteers to shout, and the astonished warriors fell head over heels in their efforts to escape. Not long afterwards, Benteen was inspecting the line when a sergeant raised his head and a bullet knocked his hat off. "Damn you," Benteen said. "I told you to keep down." The sergeant grinned and said, "Why don't you keep down, Captain?" Benteen, who referred to his wife as Mother, said, "Oh, I'm all right. Mother sewed me some good medicine in my blouse before I left home, so they won't get me." Enlisted men usually became exasperated when an officer exposes himself to the enemy because it draws fire. But again and again we are told by troopers who served with Benteen on the hill that his conviction of immortality reassured them. His conviction of immortality reassured them. Although the day was hot, he never rested. Back and forth he went, giving advice, examining bulwarks, encouraging the troops. His shirt tail had worked out of his pants and hung over his rump like a flag when he trampled around, saying, quote, "This is a groundhog case, men. It's a live or die. We must fight it out." On the afternoon of the 26th, quite a few Indians dressed up in 7th Cavalry coats, taken from Custer's dead. Some wore military hats, and at least one glued a Gideon, so the renegade whites seen by Private Pym were not altogether imaginary. In spite of such macabre evidence before their eyes, the trapped men did not suspect what had happened. From the rifle pits, they gazed at Sioux warriors wearing blue uniforms with yellow cavalry piping. They looked at the flag, and they asked each other why Custer had abandoned them. During this afternoon, a file of mounted Indians paused in the valley to contemplate the men on Reno Hill, and among their horses was a golden buckskin with a distinctive white patch. The identity of these Indians had not been learned, but several troopers who had been with the 7th for a long time said this buckskin pony belonged to the Oglala war chief, Crazy Horse, whose presence suggested that a final assault was near. Whoever they were, they dismounted and settled themselves in a circle for a smoke. It is said that they flashed signals with mirrors and gestured with feathered lances. Lances would indicate Cheyennes rather than Sioux. Nevertheless, it is conceivable that the man on the gold buckskin was Crazy Horse. Many Indians eventually came to regard this Oglala as their greatest chief, more important than Red Cloud or Sitting Bull. He was known as a man who walked through the village without speaking or noticing anybody. Sioux loved to dance and sing, but he never joined a dance, not even the sun dance, and nobody ever heard him sing. He was small, with a narrow face, and his eyes looked beyond things. Journalists like to portray him as being utterly reckless in battle, but an Oglala who rode with him said this was not true. At critical moments, Crazy Horse would dismount before shooting. Quote, "He is the only Indian I have ever known who did that often. He wanted to be sure that he hit what he aimed at. He didn't like to start a battle unless he had it all planned out in his head and knew he was going to win." This is what distinguished him from his younger brother, Little Hawk. Old men of the tribe thought Little Hawk would become greater than Crazy Horse, but Little Hawk was impetuous. He crossed the plain on a raiding expedition and never came back. Sometime later, Crazy Horse went looking for his brother's body, which he found and buried. He never boasted about what he did, nor would he take part in the lamentation that traditionally followed the death of a relative or friend. When he was a boy, the adults often discovered him sitting in the shadows listening to their conversation, and when he grew up, he continued to listen. He attended very few councils. Even then, he would not speak. He always listened. His father was an Oglala holy man. His mother came from a different tribe. Most scholars thought she was a Brule, a sister of Chief Spotted Tail, although Dr. V.T. McGillicuddy said she was a Minneconjou of the Cheyenne River Sioux, whose chief was Touch the Clouds. In either case, emigrants on the Oregon Trail frequently noticed a fair-skinned boy among the Sioux near Fort Laramie and thought he must be a captive white child. Excuse me. At this time, nearly all of the Plains Indians were restless. One ugly experience with whites created the next. Some of the Blackfoot had been stealing various items from Fort McKenzie and may have also stolen horses, so the manager, Francis Chardon, resolved to punish them. He greeted one party with a cannon blast. It has been alleged that Chardon's welcome killed about 30 Blackfoot, which probably is an exaggeration. The most detailed and reliable account seems to be that of a trader, Charles Lapreture, known as Lumpy Neck because of a goiter. He was not present, but he talked to a Fort McKenzie clerk, and he was informed that these Indians had murdered an employee, quote, a Negro boy by the name of Reese. This murder, not petty theft, caused Chardon to concoct his disastrous plan. Whatever the motive, Chardon enlisted one Alexander Harvey, quote, who, wishing no better fun, agreed to take an important part. Harvey carried a bowie knife or dirk, the French word for which is dog. An old man named Berger also was enlisted, evidently because Chardon decided to let 3 Blackfoot chiefs into the stockade where they would be assassinated, after which the gates would swing open and the cannon would blast the crowd outside. Any survivors would of course run away, leaving the ground covered with buffalo robes, jewelry, beaded moccasins, everything they had brought to trade. Chardon's plan did not work because the Blackfoot leaders inside the stockade suspected treachery. 2 of them escaped, the other went down with a bullet in one leg. The cannon was quickly fired, killing 3, not 30, but wounding 2 others. Harvey rushed out of the fort and stabbed these wounded Indians. Quote, I was told he then licked the blood off the dog, and afterward made the squaws of the fort dance the scalp around the scalps. The Blackfoot stopped trading at Mackenzie and moved across the boundary into Canada, but they returned to attack the fort. They may have burned it. After so much time, the reports are contradictory. One way or another, what had been a mutually profitable and agreeable relationship was destroyed. And we will stop there for the day. Hope you guys are still enjoying it, like I said at the beginning of the video. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video, which will come along soon. Have a good day, guys. Bye-bye.